Good evening and welcome to Pellowe Talk. I'm Dave Pellowe, and as of tomorrow, Pellowe Talk is officially joining a new website and platform called The Good Source. And The Good Source is going to be a place where you can find talk shows, podcasts, video and articles from a number of Australia's leading conservative thinkers. And I'm looking forward to that. I think it's going to be an exciting expansion of the new media space in Australia. And saw some headlines today which just shocked me at the brazen deceit and divisiveness of the mainstream media. Channel 9 in Melbourne was promoting the story that a white, heavily armed couple was threatening to shoot people if they didn't get off their grass. That was the peaceful protesters who were walking past. Of course, those peaceful protesters were the Antifa, Marxist, Black Lives Matter protests who'd entered their gated community by ripping the gates off and had threatened to kill the man and his wife, at which point they tried to call police, they tried to call security and had no successful response or reinforcements. And so they brought out their lawfully purchased firearms and promised to defend their property and their lives, as is their legal and God-given right. Of course, Channel 9 News in Melbourne said these were a couple of white people, heavily armed and threatening to shoot peaceful protesters. The narrative that the mainstream media has is just divisive, constantly promoting white guilt and victim oppressor narratives, and it's horrendous. And that's why we need a good source of reliable media, opinions and news. And we don't pretend to be objective. We declare our biases. Everybody has a worldview. Everybody has a perspective they're coming from. So it's just best to be honest about that right at the beginning and let people decide for themselves. I'm Christian, I'm conservative, and the Good Source will be a free speech platform, mostly with conservatives. Now, there is some bad news in the nation today, and that is that Peter Van Onselen has predicted that Scott Morrison should easily win the next election. The Newspoll results are out, and on a two-party preferred basis, it doesn't look so good for him, but he is absolutely romping the primary vote and has totally recovered all of the lost ground that he had over his Christmas family vacation, which the lefties never, ever wanted to forgive him for. Well, joining me tonight, I have a couple of highly celebrated political figures in the nation. And first of all, I want to welcome to the show Maryka Groenewald. Welcome, Maryka. Did I pronounce that very well?
You did. I'm very impressed. Well done.
Excellent. And for the audience's knowledge, Maryka is the Western Australian director of the Australian Christians Party. And that's a very dominant minor party in Western Australia. We also have Karina Okotel. Let's just try to add you there. Welcome to the show, Karina.
Thank you very much. And well done on the pronunciation as well.
Do people get that wrong?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Really?
How Karina, I'll answer to Karen. I'll answer to, yeah.
Wow. I didn't think that was hard. I thought that was just phonetic, straightforward. But shame on you if you've ever got Karina's name wrong. For everybody watching, Karina is the past vice president of the Federal Liberal Party and also vice president of the Victorian branch. She's a lawyer with lots of, actually both of you ladies are lawyers, aren't you? I'm feeling ganged up on there. And
no, not quite. Not a lawyer.
You got a law degree?
No,
How
politics.
did I get that wrong?
Politics and community development. So,
okay.
Yeah, there you go.
I had you pegged wrong. Well, if you're watching, we like live comments, so let us know if you've got any lawyer jokes. We'll put them on the screen.
Hold on. Don't go too far, Dave. Yeah.
As long as they're clean, it's all fun. So, yeah, I'm Scottish. If you've got Scottish jokes, just go for that. Actually, I claim whatever heritage I need. But Yeah, Karina was also one of the people alongside Lyle Shelton. Karina and Lyle gave an address at the National Press Club, a lunch in 2017, presenting the no case for why we shouldn't undefine marriage. But I guess the nation thought better of that. And we also have joining us tonight Senator Malcolm Roberts from the One Nation Party representing Queensland. Thank you for joining us on Pellowe Talk again, Senator Roberts.
You're welcome, and thank you for the invitation, Dave.
Always fun. And you're joining us from your parliamentary offices in Brisbane, which is awesome.
Electoral office. Yeah.
Your electoral office. Sorry, yeah, parliamentary office is in Parliament. Okay. Well, now, Karina, I'd actually like you to share with us a little bit about this article that you've written, contributing to The Good Source. Everybody can see that there. Hopefully I can zoom in a bit. The Good Source is goodsource.news is that web address, and that's SAUCE, like tomato sauce. Karina, tell us a little bit about this article you wrote. ScoMo is winning Newspoll, but the election's an entirely different game.
Yes, absolutely. So, as you mentioned in your introduction, Dave, Peter Van Onselen's article also making commentary on the fact that ScoMo is doing exceptionally well in the current opinion polls is probably a very bad sign, given that the last leader who predicted would win in a landslide, Bill Shorten, that didn't come to pass. But it is, an important point that Scott Morrison is doing so well in the opinion polls, and that's no doubt a testament to his work since his first election as Prime Minister, and also particularly during this COVID-19 situation. But
we can see his crash here as better PM around December, January, which was Christmas and bushfires, and then the bounce back rocketing up close to 60% there.
Sure. But what I suppose these polls don't really highlight is that even if a Prime Minister might be extraordinarily popular with the public, that doesn't necessarily affect an election outcome. So the reality is that, and these polls also show this, that the two-party preferred vote remains the same. So if an election were held today, the same election outcome as we saw in May last year would hold. So that means that the coalition would still only be in government by 3 seats. Now, what is, particularly as a Liberal who wants to see the coalition in government forever, what is concerning is that there is almost certainly going to be a redistribution of seats before the next election. It is likely that a Liberal held seat, will be taken from Western Australia, and that a new seat will be created in the Socialist Republic of Victoria, where I am, and that will most likely be a notionally Labor seat, given how things are in Victoria. So that would mean just on that redistribution, it would be likely that the coalition would only then hold government by 2 seats. On top of that, it will depend on, what kind of outcome we see. Now, if the coalition were to lose another seat or 2 seats, still could possibly form minority government, you would expect that the Katter Australia Party would support the government, but who knows about the Independent Centre Alliance, whether they would also support the coalition if further seats were lost. So it really is a very narrow margin, and most likely when we see the next election on the horizon after a redistribution, narrower than what we had last election. So it is really incumbent on the Liberal Party, the coalition, to make sure that they're doing as much as possible to increase the number of seats that are held, but also taking into account the changing demographics. Now, over the next couple of decades or more, perhaps up to 4 decades, we will see Victoria becoming the most densely populated state in the country. Now, in Victoria, we are unfortunately, I believe the most left-leaning state, and there certainly does need to be focus on how votes can be won particularly in Victoria, because we will have the most number of seats, federal seats, that need to be won to hold government. I suppose my contention in my article on the Good Source is that the majority of new population growth will come from permanent migration from overseas. 73% of migration we will see from Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. These particular cultural groupings are generally aspirational and also socially conservative. And so the coalition does need to make sure that its messaging to new arrivals in particular does appeal to those groups.
Maryka, how do you think the coalition could improve their messaging to immigrants, especially coming from those culturally conservative, socially conservative nations that we see a lot of immigration coming from these days?
We do. And I think it's one of those things where, I mean, WA, every state has got its particular nuance and every state is obviously quite different. But I mean, in a place like WA, for example, people discern the messaging. So obviously in particular electorates, the coalition were obviously very particular in the kind of people that they put forward in those electorates. But also the messaging was perhaps more family centric. They were fielding families that were more family centric. And so I think in WA, we've seen that a lot. You know, it's one thing to spruik economic well-being, which you need to do, and all these kind of big federal issues. But at the end of the day, like Karina saying, new families coming in, they're kind of very concerned about the welfare of their family and how they're going to economically make that work. So it's discerning also who you place in particular areas. And I think there's been a few misreads in terms of who a lot of the major parties have put in these electorates and completely misread the sentiment of that electorate.
Malcolm, what does One Nation do? You've actually got a lot of people would be surprised, I think, if they haven't looked closely at One Nation for some time, at exactly how much support you have amongst the conservative immigrant populations. What do you guys do to appeal to them particularly?
We tell the truth and use facts and make a logical argument. And people are very, very keen to have their country supported. And they know that both the tired old parties have been selling out to the globalists. And that's quite clear. But I just want to agree with Karina that Scott Morrison is not a shoo-in at all. He didn't win the last election. Bill Shorten lost the last election. That is quite clear.
I think that's fair.
And also, he did a good job, mind you. He did a very, very good job. Scott Morrison, I don't think, is an admirable prime minister, but he is a marvellous politician. He's very, very effective. Okay. He is riding a wave right now, but so are all incumbents, Labor and Liberal, right around the country. And that's because our country is perceived as being under threat. And so people rally around the person in charge. But the other thing to remember is that he has had no gloves laid on him because, I mean, look at Anthony Albanese. Why would you look at him? You know, there's not much there. Look at the media. They're not doing much of a job in this country. And so Scott Morrison is in clear air right now. He can sail really hard. But I agree with Karina that that doesn't mean that Liberals are shoo-in for the next election at all. There are many issues, and it'll be minor parties having a big say in the next election. Every election, One Nation vote has increased, sometimes quite dramatically, and we're picking up strong vibes. So
now I notice on your lapel you've got the pin of the little feet, which represents the size and shape of the well-formed hands and feet and fingers and toes of a preborn living human at about the time when most abortions are carried out. The relevance of that to what we're talking about now is, I think there was some very, very concerned and concentrated anti-abortion activism from people like Cherish Life and the Australian Christian Lobby, who targeted a couple of the Labor seats specifically because they took a pro-abortion policy to the last federal election, which no doubt helped Labor to lose the election. As you pointed out, it was a considerable loss as opposed to a stunning win, and not to take anything away from the miraculous win that the Liberal Party did pull off. There was a lot of external factors, which included the Labor leaders' lack of personal appeal, and unfortunately, say again.
Honesty. People didn't perceive him as honest at all.
True.
Yeah, and I wish it didn't come down to personality for so many voters, but it does. However, it also came down to policy. It was an appalling policy to how can we increase the taxpayers' investment in killing Australian citizens? How can we increase the frequency of which we kill Australian citizens in these abortion clinics? So what I guess that leads us into as another topic to explore tonight, which is, is it good to put all our eggs in a major party? And that's an open question. I imagine Karina's going to advocate for her party, the Liberal Party, and the two of you from the minor parties will say, you know what, there's some strategic advantage to supporting a minor party. So let's get into that and explore. I want to hear from you, the viewer, as well. What do you think? Minor party or major party? What disappoints you about either? What gives you hope about either? Your comments, need to put them on screen and float them into the conversation if possible. Interested if you've changed recently, and yeah, let's have a chat from you. Malcolm, why don't you keep us going? Why do you think a minor party is where you've thought your best efforts are in shaping the country, as well as the average person?
Well, I think for a start, Karina won't like what I'm about to say, but there's very little difference in policies between the Labor Party and the Liberal Party. In the last election under Bill Shorten and Chris Bowen, there were some significant changes in taxing franked dividends, and another one, I can't remember the exact one. Oh, the wild claims about climate. But there are very little in the way of difference. It's a matter of degree. The renewable energy target, which John Howard introduced, the Howard-Anderson Turnbull government of 2007, has been the destroyer of our electricity sector. We've gone from the lowest priced electricity in the world, which is extremely important for manufacturing, for agriculture and for tertiary. And we're now the highest cost of electricity. We're using the same high energy coal. We export that coal to China. They can produce electricity using our coal at about a third of the price and sell it at a third of the price that we sell it for because of our inflated regulations. Climate policy is the same. Neither are based on empirical evidence. The immigration policies are the same. Large numbers of immigrants, and we don't support that at all. We want net zero immigration. Water policies are the same. Murray-Darling Basin policies are the same, and both have gutted this country, gutted the Murray-Darling Basin and our agricultural sector. The stealing of farmers' property rights and their ability to use land, that was done by John Howard's government with John Anderson's complicity, and that was engineered first of all with a National Party premier in Queensland, Rob Borbidge, and then continued with Bob Carr in New South Wales and with Peter Beattie in Queensland, and that has stolen the rights of farmers to use their land, and that's cost farmers hundreds, and I mean hundreds of billions of dollars, and it was done in a way that was duplicitous. Now everyone is on that bandwagon, because the farmers don't have a voice anymore. The National Party has become a toady for the Liberal Party, and the people in the bush know that. Southern New South Wales, Western Queensland, Northern Queensland, National Party's on the nose, and they're now desperately trying to pretend that they differ from people like Trent Zimmerman and their policies. But they're the same policies that the globalists push, the Liberal Party's now pushing, Trent Zimmerman pushes, the National Party votes for them. And that's, people can see that now. And so the fact is, the One Nation raising those issues has led to a lot of people now questioning those issues, and a lot of people jumping in behind us and saying, well, the Nationals are on the nose because they no longer look after the bush. The Liberals are on the nose because they no longer look after manufacturing and small business. I mean, that's the reality. And there are many issues where we have led the way: coal, the climate scam, the cheap electricity, proper infrastructure for water, restoration of property rights for farmers, many other issues, manufacturing, security, reducing our dependence on China, improving our manufacturing security. We have led the way with that. We have led the way. And now the Nationals pretend to do that, but they can't really do that because the Liberals won't let them. So that's why I think it's so important, because we raise the issues. As Maryka said, there are too many people in the Conservative side of politics who don't have the guts to say what's really needed. And so we do have that, and that's why we're needed as a force, and we'll continue growing, I believe, strongly because of that. People trust us.
Karina, is there any difference between Liberal Party policy and Labor Party policy?
Absolutely. So policy always stems from a party's belief platform. The Labor Party is a socialist democratic party that is in their party platform. The Liberal Party is a party for freedom, broadly a range of freedom, free speech, free enterprise, but fundamentally it's a party born out of the anti-communist movement. So completely diametrically opposed. You have one party that promotes and comes from a socialist background, another party that comes from a more democratic background. And it's based on those fundamental differences of beliefs that policies are then generated. Liberal Party policies do have to align with our party beliefs. That is something that's in our federal constitution. So it is really the belief system that separates these two parties, and that's why we see such different policies. That's why we see a Labor Party that promotes policies that require higher taxes. They won't say they're the party for higher taxes, but all of their policies point to that. The Liberal Party, on the other hand, is the party for the individual and the lowering of taxes, less regulation to allow more independence of the individual. So very, very different. And that is why the policies, in fact, are very, very different, and why there is such a contest between the two major parties. But while I understand why minor parties exist, the reality is that it will be one of the two major parties that will govern. And that's because both parties have had that long-term experience, that trust that they have built in the community to govern, have policies that are not just limited but cover all aspects of policy. Also, I suppose you could say both major parties do govern from the centre towards the Liberal Party towards the right, and for the Labor Party towards the left, but they do have broad appeal, and that is why they are parties of government. So while I completely understand minor parties are the voices that advocate and lobby on issues, and that is very important in terms of holding both major parties and particularly the government to account, and making sure that issues that have been overlooked, not addressed, are addressed. The reality that we have to face is that it is going to be either major party that will be ultimately making the decisions for the country or for their states or territories.
So, Karina, you said just then that you understand why minor parties exist. Yeah. I'd like you to enlarge on that for us just briefly.
Completely. So I know that there is often frustration with policies of a major party, but when someone joins a political party, it is not because they necessarily agree with all policies. In fact, within a party room, members of a party will have disagreement. Within cabinet, there will be disagreement. So the idea that you cannot have divergent thought from the policies of a party to support a party is perhaps a misunderstanding. So I do see why minor parties do come up. I suppose it's somewhat similar to a church that splits and you have different denominations coming up because there's disagreements in some aspects or another. And often those who go on to start minor parties originally come from a major party themselves. But, you know, and that's certainly the case, Pauline Hanson, Cory Bernardi. But, you know, while those disagreements exist, being able to be a voice within the party and advocate within the party can often be far more powerful. So, for example, if you are a member of a major political party, for example, the Liberal Party, your membership is incredibly valuable. So when you go to the ballot box, you are 1 in 100,000 votes, let's say at the federal level, making a decision on who the next member of parliament will be. If you're a member of the Liberal Party, your vote, when it comes to a pre-selection, suddenly reduces or is amplified rather to perhaps 1 in a few hundred. That will be the pre-selectors who will make the decision about who the next candidate will be for the party or that upcoming election. And as we know, in most seats, the candidate who will be elected will be either Liberal or Labor. And if it's a strong Liberal or Labor seat, then it will go that way, one way or the other. So those pre-selectors within the party actually determine who the next member of parliament will be. It may seem as if the 100,000 voters are making that determination, but in fact, if you are a party member, your vote, your voice is that much more amplified, and you can have such a huge influence on who sits in parliament and then, you know, what kind of policies are put forward. So if you do want to have a voice in terms of changing policy, it is extraordinarily powerful to be a member of a major political party.
Maryka, you've been sitting there taking all this in, first Senator Roberts and then Karina as a vested player in the Liberal Party. And your experience as state director of a minor party, the Australian Christians in Western Australia, has basically been, I guess, working with a lot of the people who are disaffected by the major party experience. And you have to work with not only the major parties, but also the minor parties that are on the scene and in the parliament in Western Australia. So lay out for us from your perspective the pros of being a minor party supporter and the cons of supporting a major party, which probably drives people to the minor party.
Yes. Look, again, in WA, it's very different because I think, like Karina's saying, the state she's in, unfortunately, it's obviously very Labor. So with us in WA, a lot of the Liberal MPs, and I know there are good people in Parliament, when it comes to certain issues, they are muzzled. And I've had many MPs tell me, Maryka, you know, there are good people in the party. And I go, I know, there's probably a lot of Christians too. But on particular key issues, especially in WA, those MPs might last minute decide to vote against a particular legislation. So in WA, we just had the euthanasia legislation passed last year, and we met with so many different MPs. And I mean, even in the Liberal Party, really good people, and yet the numbers were still stacked against in favour of euthanasia. So it's really tricky when you break it down and you start kind of looking at the facts and you start looking at the legislation, that you go, well, if all these good people do exist in the Liberal Party, and I understand what Karina is saying, it's not necessarily that everybody agrees, we have to appreciate when it comes to core issues that do rally a lot of Christians in particular in our state, if the Liberal Party consistently votes against damaging legislation, people see through it. They go, well, we voted for this good person in Parliament. Here they are. They voted in favour of a piece of legislation. How can we trust them? So that's the sort of stuff, I guess, as a Christian party, one of the issues that we find a lot. Yes, we're a Christian party with Christian underpinnings, but I guess our support does come from a range of people in a range of groups. And is also why in WA we have really good working relationships with people like One Nation and Shooters and Fishers and a lot of the other smaller parties, because people have found that they're perhaps a bit more grassroots based, a bit more involved in kind of the everyday movements of that electorate. And again, a bit like Malcolm was saying, you know, you don't get that really high-end political rhetoric that we get from a lot of the professional MPs. So from my perspective, one of the things that is so important for me is every election cycle, we have the opportunity to talk about these particular platforms that the other parties won't touch. And at the end of the day, I was speaking to someone last week, when we're lobbying around key issues, let's say human trafficking is a big one in the upcoming election for us as well. A lot of the other parties won't really touch those kind of pro-life conversations because it doesn't win them any votes. So I do believe the functioning of a party like ours adds accountability, gives a bit of voice to those issues that people felt aren't necessarily heard in the major parties. And again, unfortunately, despite good people being in both parties, you're still muzzled and you still have to toe party line, and that becomes really tricky when you're dealing with issues of morality. Like, you need to be able to say and vote according to how you want to vote. And even with the euthanasia legislation last year, we know that certain MPs were told you have a conscious vote, but Labor said you do, but you don't really. So it's a really tricky mindset. You know, where do you draw that line, and who do you trust? How many times can you trust the numbers in the Liberal Party to do the right thing when the track record, I suppose, suggests otherwise?
And Dave, can I jump in?
Please.
Thank you. I listened to Bronwyn Bishop, and I've got some regard for Bronwyn Bishop. She's fairly strong, fairly honest, I think, and outspoken at times, which I cherish. And she was talking on the release of Malcolm Turnbull's book. And she went to town on Malcolm Turnbull because of the way he behaved, and I think that was deserved. But she said, look, he brought in water policies that's destroying the country. He gave the French the submarine contract. He's got climate and energy policies that are destroying the country. And she said, what's worse is that he infected the Liberal Party with the socialism virus. And I said, wow, well said. I couldn't have done it any better myself. She's very, very good at that. But there's another question. What's Scott Morrison done since then to reverse that? Not a thing. And so what we'll see is that in both the title parties, I don't know if anyone knows of Simone Weil. She's a French philosopher. She wrote on the abolition of all political parties. What she said, I think, is quite correct. When parties have a lot of power, they tend to then perpetuate the party. So instead of working for the country, they work for the party. And that's very, very clear. And what we've seen in this country is both Labor and Liberal are socialist in many, many ways. I don't buy Karina's argument that Liberals are not socialist and that Labor only is socialist. But they're not serving the people. It's the people serving government. And I go to Sir Robert Menzies. In 1953, he introduced double taxation legislation, which made it possible for foreign-owned multinational companies to never pay company tax. Never. And that's going on now. So who's paying the tax? Mums and dads and small businesses in this country. And 90% of our large companies, according to Jim Kalali, who was the Deputy Commissioner of Taxation up until about 2014, 90% of Australia's large companies are foreign-owned. So we're missing out on a lot of tax. And the Labor Party and Liberal Party, and I can give you examples of the Labor Party, have condoned that and enabled it. They're not serving the national interest. And so I just couldn't let that go. Malcolm Turnbull infected the party with socialism, but no one is thinking about removing it. And I know many frustrated Liberals in Parliament who roll their eyes and can't say what they really think. We're not voting for people are not voting for the Liberal MP. They're voting not for a Liberal philosophy. They're voting for a few backroom party brokers, power brokers, who manage to select and heavily influence the selection of MPs into our Parliament. They're not representing the electorates, they're representing the power brokers. That's true. Yeah,
something I'd like the two of you to, I guess, talk about is something that Karina touched on as possible within the Liberal Party. And I don't understand, and you take the time to correct me now if I'm wrong. It doesn't seem that there's the same opportunity in most minor parties to get involved at a branch level and help pre-select the next candidate and get involved in shaping the policies. Now, I've been involved in the leadership of a minor party, and I understand the kind of energy and angst that a lot of people bring after being disaffected by the major party to a minor party. So why don't, Malcolm, you start? Exactly how can a member of One Nation get involved in contributing to the policies, leadership and candidates selection in their area?
Well, we have two main ways, and I understand your point, and I'll come back to it. But in answer to your question, we have two main ways. If you look at Pauline Hanson's Facebook following, it's about number 3 amongst politicians in this country. But if you look at her interactions, it's easily number 1, way ahead of anyone else. If you look at mine, I'm about a 1/5 of her following, but my interactions sometimes are up with hers. And so if she has an ordinary week and I have a stellar week, then I'm actually ahead of her on interactions. But what I'm saying is that we interact with people because we understand the issues. That's a reflection of what we really do, and that is get out and listen. Now, I'll guarantee that a Labor MP, a Labor senator, or a Liberal MP, a Liberal senator, can't really do much by pretending to listen, because people know that they're not going to have much effect because the power brokers do call the shots. But with us, we actually listen, and then we reflect it on the floor of Parliament. We reflect it in our policies. And so I want to come back to the premise of your point, which I think is valid, that there's lack of party structure. There are many ways for people to get involved. We don't really care if someone comes to us and they're a Labor voter, disenfranchised, or even a strong supporter. They're not having any luck with the Labor Party or the Liberal Party, so they give us the issue and we fight for it. We don't mind that at all. But where we have a problem is that when we have quick growth in a party, we've seen it in the past, before I was a member of One Nation 20 years ago, that some of the branches were taken over by people from the Labor Party and maybe even the Liberal Party, and they were taken over to disrupt and to destroy. Peter Beattie, John Howard, their governments colluded to knock out Pauline Hanson and actually created a bill, legislation, to put her in jail. And so that's the way they did that. John Howard's government, Peter Beattie's government, both separately manipulated the preference voting system to take away from optional preferential voting, which is true preferential voting, to make it compulsory so that eventually Labor or Liberal would get a vote. There are many ways the old parties have tried to destroy us, and sometimes it's infecting us from within. And so we have to be very careful about how we do that. And right now, Pauline is has ultimate power in our party. But fortunately, she listens and she really connects with people. And that's why people like her, because she's honest and trustworthy. So we have a different way of engaging with people. Maybe when we get larger, we have to do that. Once we get beyond the fragile stage of being flooded by the people or Liberal people to try and knock us out.
Maryka, what's, I guess, the explanation of how party structure and influence sharing works in Australian Christians specifically?
Yeah, well, I guess for us it's very similar. There are election committees that function within the party to make sure candidates are looked at and vetted. And unfortunately, yes, it's a minor party, so there are, certain situations and tricks around, getting candidates elected across all electorates, which we try our best to do. But there's certainly, I guess for us, it's so important to make sure that, of course, the people that we are fielding are checked out and vetted. And I guess perhaps in the past, that's something across the board that perhaps minor parties haven't done that well. But it's moving forward. It's something that I definitely know that's something we do. There are election committees. There are people who make sure that the people who are representing you at a legislative assembly and legislative council level are good quality people. I must say, with Australian Christians as well, we've kind of weathered the minor party storm over the years. And of course, a lot of people thought, oh, when Corey started his party, this huge conservative movement, we're going to rally behind him. And at the time, there was so much enthusiasm for it. And I know a lot of good people that put a lot of energy into it. But I think as well, that grassroots structuring, that having that consistency and runs on the board is a big thing. And I think the one thing that a lot of these smaller minor parties forget is that people look at who you are in the state and whether there's relationship there, whether there's trust there, whether there's a bit of social capital there. Politics is a relationship thing, like Malcolm said as well. So people can quickly discern if you're just in and out and just there, you know, for the sake of politics. And of course, in WA, the preference system here allows a bit of a manipulation to take place. So it's very interesting, and I think for us, always very mindful to make sure our candidates are vetted properly. We've got local chapters that function obviously across the state as well, but also to make sure that we show people that, you know, we're not just a blow-in, blow-out kind of party. We're active in between election cycles. We keep these other guys on their toes, and of course, you know, we're very active and committed in fielding candidates in state and federal and by-elections as well, and that's important.
Karina,
could
have you
I
got
add
any?
something, please, Dave?
Sure, and then I'll come to you, Karina, just to weigh in.
I'll go ahead while Dave's. Dave, I want to jump on what Maryka said as well. I agree with what she was saying. And One Nation also has a regional committee system, and we have regional committee chairs which hold functions, and that enables people to have a voice. But we also have, as Maryka pointed out, a very strong energy to actually have a go. And I can point to Stuart Bonds, for example, who nearly knocked off Joel Fitzgibbon, a Labor Party shadow minister in a long-held Labor seat in the Hunter. And Stuart Bonds did it by getting around and listening, and he established relationships, exactly as Maryka said. And so Stuart had a go. He would not have had a go in one of the tight old parties. And so there are many, many ways we listen and actually actively engage with our constituents and our supporters and our party members.
I think that
the fact is that Labor Party and Liberal Party are decreasing in membership, and we're growing in membership. So that tells us something, because people don't feel heard.
I think I can't speak for all states, but I know the LNP is after Scott Morrison got rid of Malcolm Turnbull, and probably giving Scott too much direct credit for that. But after Scott Morrison replaced Malcolm Turnbull, and after Cory Bernardi collapsed the Conservative Party, then there was a huge influx of memberships back into the LNP, at least in Queensland. Karina, do you know how party numbers are going around the state? Was it the same in other states? And feel free to add any comments to the conversation.
If I'm wrong on
since
that,
you've been
because
out.
Yeah, I'm quite.
If I'm
shocked
wrong on that
at,
because of a recent change, then I apologise.
No, I'm quite shocked at the misconceptions and misunderstandings about the Liberal Party across the board. Firstly, to suggest that the party is a socialist party, it is absolutely opposed to socialism. It's part of the party platform. I wouldn't have joined a party that supports socialism. That would make absolutely no sense. I know all Liberal Party members would be absolutely appalled at that suggestion. The idea that, party membership is on the decline, absolutely incorrect. More and more people are flocking and supporting major parties, certainly the Liberal Party. I can't speak for the Labor Party, nor, perhaps what, has Malcolm, you've suggested applies to them, but certainly not the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party members can exercise their conscience on all votes. They don't have to toe a party line. They can cross the floor. They're not expelled from the party. They can vote according to conscience if they choose to. But most importantly, as a party member, you actually do get to influence your local members or parliamentary members in an incredible way. It allows you huge access to members of parliament. As someone who was highly involved in the No campaign, being a Liberal Party member meant that I was able to speak directly to members of parliament on that issue, and as a party member who would then have voting rights at pre-selections or on policy at our state council and other issues, they were very keen to bend their ear and hear what I had to say. And it does make a massive difference in terms of what they actually do on the floor of Parliament. They do listen to their membership first and foremost. I mean, that comes from John Howard said, you have to listen to the party membership, to your base, first and foremost, and that certainly has played out. I think the comments about Malcolm Turnbull have been fair, but the reality is that unless we do have good membership in our party at the grassroots level, who then go on to pre-select our candidates who become members of parliament,
let me jump in, Karina. There's two major examples that I can think of, which I want to think that what you're saying is generally true, but two major examples. One, I don't know how a anti-socialist party could elect somebody like Malcolm Turnbull. The guy's slightly right of Chairman Mao. It's just ridiculous how anti-freedom and small business that guy was. It's absolutely appalling. But as to representing the members and the party, the LNP conventions conferences here in Queensland, just the context I'm most intimately familiar with, are overwhelmingly, vocally, robustly anti-abortion. And yet we had 3 sitting elected members of the parliament from the LNP who crossed the floor. I guess it speaks to your assertion of freedom of conscience, but they crossed the floor to literally not just oppose the party will, not just the parliamentary party will, but they went right against the members and really went against the party values. And maybe that speaks to the dichotomy that we're experiencing, that we are seeing some socialism creeping into the Liberal Party despite the Constitution, that despite what the party members want and the Constitution says, there's the most shocking members of Parliament in the Liberal Party sometimes, such as Malcolm Turnbull.
Sure. So addressing, the issue of Malcolm Turnbull, if we don't have a membership that subscribe to the party values and beliefs, if you do have people joining the party or a small membership where, you get perhaps even special interest groups joining the party, trying to hijack the party agenda, which does happen from time to time, and you don't have a broad membership that do represent the actual values of the party and will make sure that those are held firmly to, then you do see the outcomes like Malcolm Turnbull becoming the leader of the party. And how that eventuates is because our local grassroots members pre-select a candidate, member of parliament, who would then, if they don't necessarily hold dear our party's values, will then ultimately go and vote for a leader who has the values of Malcolm Turnbull to be the Prime Minister of the country. That is why it's so important that we have a membership that are holding tight and are actually committed to the values of the party, to make sure that we get the best people, both of our membership running as candidates for pre-selection and also choosing who the candidates will be, so that we have the best possible talent sitting in our parliamentary benches who will then go on to select the leader of the country. That is how critical it is. It's not, it seems so out of reach, the idea of how someone becomes the Prime Minister of the country, the leader of the country. But the reality is that it all starts literally in a hall of a pre-selection, maybe at a bowling club hall or something like that, where party members gather, the party faithful choose the candidate who becomes the elected member of parliament at the ballot box, who then goes on in the party room to elect that leader. That is, pure and simple how it works. And if we don't make sure that we have good candidates, then we have outcomes like Malcolm Turnbull becoming leader. And how we get good candidates is if we have a membership that hold true and hold dear to our party platform and beliefs.
Now, here's my take on it. Eli
Can I jump in again, Dave?
Okay, Malcolm, you're my very favourite guest.
Hold on. Hold on. Is that
Oh, what? Did I say that? Oh, I only say that to my kids.
John Howard.
Yeah.
When John Howard, I happened to be in Tenterfield and I saw the Tenterfield Historical Society Museum and I saw the pictures of every Prime Minister in Australia's history, and there was John Howard at the time in 2007, the latest picture up. And I thought, gee, this man has had quite a contribution in the last 30 years. And so when he got knocked out of Bennelong, I actually wrote him a letter of thanks because I thought he's really contributed. And
Nice.
and then I did some research in the case of, and I don't do that very often, but because I don't know him personally, but I thought he did a good job, so I wrote him a letter. So I thought highly of him. And then I did some research into climate over 12 years. And in 2014, 7 years after he left Parliament, he spoke at a lecture in London, Global Warming Policy Foundation, and he admitted that he is agnostic on climate change. He doesn't know the science. He doesn't decide. The science hasn't helped him decide. So what the hell did he put his renewable energy target on? What the hell did he steal farmers' property rights for? His government did that. Now, Karina, I understand you don't think the Liberals are socialists, but Bronwyn Bishop has said that the Liberal Party under Turnbull was socialist, and it hasn't changed. But John Howard worked with, first of all, Rob Borbidge, a National Party minister, Premier of Queensland, then with Peter Beattie and Bob Carr for his government to steal farmers' property rights. That is not socialism, that's communism. And he did it, his government did it in a way that bypassed Section 51, Clause 31 of the Constitution that said, if someone's property rights are affected by the federal government, then they need to have just terms compensation. They went through the states, and Peter Beattie has a letter with John Howard where he said, yes, we will agree to comply with the Kyoto Protocol. We will steal farmers' property. He didn't use that word, of course, but they will take farmers' property rights so that you don't have to pay compensation and you can comply with the Kyoto Protocol. Bob Carr said the same thing in public. He's on video doing so. So there's the Liberal Party under its latest and one of the supposedly greatest hero figures of the Liberal Party actually putting in place a communist policy that is hurting farmers to this day and that the Labor Party has built upon. So, you know, and I remember there are some pretty active members in the LNP and they can be proud and hold their heads up high, but they've been successful in moving motions at local branch level and at state level in Queensland, telling the Liberal Party, LNP, sorry, they must not do certain things. And everyone just knows that the Liberal Party LNP members are not beholden to that. The MPs don't have to comply with what the grassroots tell them. They just go to and vote any which way they want. Those policies have never, ever been complied with, even though they were enacted in 2013 and 2015, completely shunned by the LNP members that go to Canberra.
Look, in terms of policy that grassroots members have popular support for, the big stick for members of parliament, if they don't listen to what the party base are saying, is that these same members then become their pre-selectors at a convention. So if they do want to retain their seats, they're very conscious that they need to actually respect what the views of the party membership are. Now, also, in terms of policy, as I said at the outset, there are divergent views on policy across Liberal Party. No one will agree with everything. Does every leader of the party get everything right all the time? Absolutely not. And that's why there is great debate in the party room, great debate in cabinet, ultimately the laws that come forward, even, you know, great debate on the parliamentary floor. So all of this contributes to what actual policy is passed. But even though there might be that divergence of views, what policies actually win out are the policies that have the majority support of those sitting members in Parliament, particularly the members of the government, then the members of Cabinet. Who selects those members? That is the grassroots membership in the Liberal Party of the Liberal Party.
If you look at the last election, Karina, if I can just wrap this up, Malcolm, we're going to move on to another topic. What Eli has said here, my local state LNP member proudly supported euthanasia. How can I support that? I guess my take, Eli, is you're not supporting all of the party's policies when you join the party. You'll never, I hope you can't, you're very unlikely to find a party that you agree with 100%. The reason you join a party is probably because it's the party that aligns closest to what you believe, and that you want to be part of the system somehow to defeat the worst ideas. And that doesn't mean you endorse the policies that your local member supports. As Karina's saying, what you have an opportunity to do when you join the LNP or the Liberal Party or the Nationals is that you have the chance, because your local member supported euthanasia, you have a chance to then register a vote to make sure that guy is not your local member at the next election. And maybe you need to serve some waiting time, so it's the one after that. But if the major parties have been infiltrated, and they have, by progressives, then surely it's incumbent upon us to not surrender the ground, retreat and let them have it, but to actually get back in there and take them back by flooding them with people who will return them to their original purpose and foundation. Now, I'm not saying that you need to vote Liberal. In fact, what I teach is that you should be an undecided voter at every election, even if you're the member of a political party. What you should be doing is joining the party that best represents you, helping them to become the best that they can be because you share most of their values and you want to defeat the opposition. And then what you do is, after the party's pre-selected a candidate, you look at all the candidates that are on offer and you find the candidate from any party that most supports your values. And if that's not from your party, the right thing to do, the moral thing to do, the democratic thing to do is to order your own preferences, not how your party tells you, but how they best represent you. And then with all of that in place, you can then take your influence, your personal influence, to every election, and you can say to every candidate, I'm genuinely an undecided voter. And if you represent me on these 2 or 3 critical issues better than anybody else, I'm not just going to vote for you. I'm going to help 10 people vote for you, my family and friends. I'm going to donate to you as I can. I'm going to volunteer for you on election day. I have to turn up anyway. I might as well stick around for 2 hours. And I'm going to give you my front yard or business shop, space for using for your election signs. I'm going to do everything I can to help you get elected, even if you're a member of another party. Now, you guys may not be able to support somebody else if we don't have the best candidate, but that is the way I operate. I personally will vote for the best candidate, regardless of which party I prefer at the top. And I think that's just the way it's meant to work and the most honest way. Final thoughts on this topic from all 3 of you.
Yeah, I think absolutely people should vote according to their non-negotiables. It's like each of our parties have their reasoning for existence. And so if people are absolutely across particular issues and they're not being heard in a particular party, well, join that party that absolutely shares those non-negotiables and get involved with that and be committed for the long term. I think people are very quick to kind of jump from party to party perhaps, but if there's opportunity there and you're very passionate about particular issues, mobilize yourself for your talents and invest in that particular party and get involved. That's ultimately the only thing that's going to change it and keep these guys accountable. So vote according to your non-negotiables first.
Yep. Karina, Malcolm, final word on party differences?
Well, as a Liberal Party member, I can say that if you're not happy with your candidate, who is the Liberal candidate at the ballot box, and you do yourself subscribe to the values of the Liberal Party, then do think about getting involved, because our party can only put up candidates as good as its current membership. So we need to have a good and strong membership in order to have people from that local area involved in the party, having been a member of the party for at least a year, to put their hand up and say, I'm interested in representing my community. And from that pool to then be a pre-selector as a member of the party to then make sure that the right candidates are in there, that we have the best possible candidates at the ballot box. So if you're finding your Liberal Party candidate isn't the crux of it is, you find your Liberal Party candidate isn't the best candidate on that ballot paper, and you believe in the values of the party, get involved, help us.
Yep, fair point.
Only a very minor point to add, because what you essentially said, Dave, describes democracy. That's the way it works, and full credit to you. Secondly, we on our how to vote cards, because people ask for sometimes how to vote cards, our recommendations or our suggestions, we always put in the most prominent position, you own your preferences, you decide where they want to go. In case you haven't got the time, here they are below us. You own your preferences, you allocate the vote as you want. And we're the only ones that do that. I think that's honest.
I respect that, because there's a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of ignorance. People think that parties somehow control their preferences, and that it's just I don't know why the parties allow that ignorance to persist, but I guess it's because it is self-serving, if I'm a little cynical. Well, just going to do a little bit of promo here. So thank you, everyone, for watching. You can subscribe to me on all the social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Parler at Dave Pellowe. We need to convince Maryka to join Twitter, and for Karina to use hers. But you can get email updates.
They'll ban me for life.
You can get email updates of all the things that are going on at goodsource.news on that platform, Karina's articles and more. Maryka, Malcolm, you're welcome to submit some articles for consideration from the very strict editor.
Great.
And don't forget to also tune into the Good Source podcast, which is now not just me, but everybody on that platform writing articles. I've had a few people ask me, where's Political Posting Mama? Well, the good news is she's making a comeback, and she's got an article that will probably be published tomorrow, including a podcast version of it. And you'll only be able to get that on the Good Source, and make sure you subscribe to those podcasts and check out the website. Make sure you don't miss out on those things. You can follow our guests on Twitter at Karina Okotel, and maybe she'll be in there more often. You can look her up on Facebook as well, and the same with Malcolm Roberts, at mrobertsqld, and Maryka Groenewald Community, and the spelling is there on the screen for you. If you're listening to the podcast,
tricky one.
Look up the YouTube at roughly the what are we 1 hour and 1 minute mark, and you'll be able to see how to spell that there. That's that. Now, what else did I want to mention?
If
you're
I
busting,
could
Maryka.
Yeah, just a quick one, just while people are still there. I guess it's worth mentioning that I think it's Victoria and WA that still have the group voting tickets. So unfortunately, with our states, we are required as a party to allocate preferences. So whilst I think Queensland have the opportunity not to do that, we actually have to physically go through before every state election and allocate individual preferences to particular people. And of course, those group voting tickets that are submitted on behalf of the party then allocate those preferences. But I guess it's worth mentioning.
Is that an option for people, or is that an actual control that's compulsory?
That's actually what's put in place through the parties. So you have to go through, allocate your preferences. People can obviously ultimately still vote how they want to vote,
right?
But in the state system,
I actually like that.
If you vote one above the line, those preferences are then allocated by the particular party. As we're in the federal system where you've got 1 to 6 above the line, I often say to people, vote 1 till how many you can above the line, because you make sure that those preferences and those votes don't exhaust past a certain point. So state elections are a bit of a different animal, and I know they vary from state to state, but just so people are aware, there are some tricky things around obviously how preferences work, and obviously how those group voting tickets work in different states as well.
Yeah, indeed. Very good. Now, look, one thing I wanted to have a chat about was how President Trump is actually going. Let me just say up front, if you're a little bit sensitive about credit going to Donald Trump for any of the good things that he's done, if that annoys you, then you've got a problem. Demonizing somebody is just intellectually dishonest. By the same token, if you can't stand to hear Donald Trump criticized, you might have a problem idolizing somebody. Let's just be honest about our politicians. Hold them to account with honesty and not either idolization or demonization. So let's have at it. Has he been, full credit to where he's been up to this year, but I think he's kind of dropped the ball this year, especially with regards to the race riots going on in America. Over to you, Karina. What do you think?
Look, it is a difficult situation. I mean, at his last State of the Union address, at that point in time, Donald Trump was doing so well, even in the polls, but also his articulation of what his government had achieved. Even the vision for the future was there in terms of jobs, economic policy. When it came to minority groups, his track record in terms of job creation and supporting those groups was incredible. But then came coronavirus, then came the Black Lives Matter movement, and that has completely derailed, I suppose, the agenda that they had going forward, because now, the story about jobs that is, with all the lockdowns, that's been lost. The story about, supporting minority groups and seeing more people who have been previously disadvantaged entering the workforce, youth employment on the rise, that has, again, all been derailed. And the story coming forward from the situation of the coronavirus pandemic and also the Black Lives Matter movement is that Trump is hopeless, he can't keep the country together, that things are dysfunctional, and all of that. And I suppose, unfortunately, in some ways, Trump's rhetoric, which is usually fantastic, his tweets in terms of disrupting the narrative, calling out the fake news, I suppose in some ways it is useful for the left, for the Democrat Party, to be able to jump on those types of tweets and hone in on the parts that can be construed as him suddenly being anti people of colour, of him suddenly being a crazy man, essentially. But, at the last, and sadly, I suppose, last Trump rally, for example, he talked about the achievements in government previously, and then his main focus is on criticising his critics, criticising the media, pulling out anecdotes about, how this person is bad, how I'm amazing, but not providing that same, as he did at the State of Union address, that same vision for the future. And without that, unfortunately, Joe Biden in hiding is someone who might pose a real threat, which is quite incredible. So at the same time, I think the way forward for Trump is to find his feet again. I think, certainly coronavirus and what's happening in the US in terms of number of deaths is something that has, taken them off guard. The Black Lives Matter movement, unfortunately, not being able to get a handle of that and bring that under control quick enough has been quite devastating at the moment. But if Trump is able to turn that ship around in terms of being able to really show leadership on both of those issues, and then articulate how he's going to see the recovery plan unfolding, Joe Biden will have nothing on him because he has no plan. His plan is to hide at the moment.
Malcolm, what do you think should have been the response to the manifest lawlessness and terrorization of American streets during these Marxist communist race riots that have seen spill out in this ridiculous, prolonged now, sustained attack on the freedom and safety of American cities?
Well, I'd like to make decisions based on facts and comments based on facts. And I appreciate Karina correcting me about the recent increase in Liberal LNP membership in Queensland, or Dave did. So, as I understand it, one of the figures I saw, and I can't remember the source, the 12 worst cities for crime in America are all Democrat-run. And the state governors have enormous responsibility for calling in law enforcement, not the president. The state governors have ultimate responsibility over the coronavirus response, not the president. And I think Trump did a very good job in trying to keep the country upbeat, because that is an American president's one of his or her number one jobs is to keep the country upbeat. And I saw what Reagan did. I happened to be living in America when Reagan came in, and he did just that after miserable years with Carter. So I think Trump has done well. The other thing is that gun ownership has skyrocketed in America, and Democrats are now buying guns. And coronavirus is a threat. I don't think Sleepy Joe has shown any signs of being able to handle anything. They probably can't even remember the previous day. But what we've seen in the media is their blatant distortion and reversals of the truth to try and embarrass Trump. And it's coordinated. There's no doubt about that. Antifa is coordinated. Trump came out right up front and banned Antifa, which he should have done. And full marks to him. No one else is doing that. They're a terrorist organization. They're scum. And so Trump did that. And I think what you'll find is that many sensible Americans will actually be voting for Trump because he is a strong figure. Whether or not they think he was a little off track in the coronavirus, I don't think that a lot of people will actually think that. They realize that the media misrepresents him. They realize the media distorts what he says and reverses what he says. They also realize that the forces that he's up against are pretty heavy. And he is the only person since Reagan to come along and shake the tree. He's the only one. And I think a lot of Americans will always remember that. And so I wouldn't write him off. I'm not one for going by the polls. I think Trump is inherently doing a wonderful job for America and for the American people. He's the only one who serves what they need. He pulls out of Paris. He's talking about pulling out of the UN. He's pulled out of World Health Organization, which is a corrupt organization, just like the rest of the UN. And he's slammed China, which we have been pushing the same thing in this country, but Liberal Party and Labor Party don't want an inquiry into that relationship. I don't know why, but Trump has shown guts, he's shown courage, and he's shown that he can still hold his head high. And I think he'll do okay, because the American people ultimately want someone strong, especially when they're threatened with race riots, when they're threatened with violence from weak governors that are a result of weak governors, and when they're threatened by a pandemic. So I think he will respond pretty well.
Any thoughts on the changes seen by Trump's leadership or patterns in Trump's leadership this year as opposed to the last 3 years, Maryka?
I think the biggest thing is the messaging. You know, like we've all seen Trump mobilize people around this, you know, drain the swamp, make America great again. They're very mobilizing messages. They're very clever messages. And so I don't blame the poor guy. He's been so busy combating the media, combating the riots. And again, people have wrongfully assumed that the ultimate law enforcement responsibility rests with the president, which it doesn't. I remember watching one of the interviews on Fox News, and the guys were saying, look, you need to be lobbying your governors for law enforcement. These are the guys who were shouting about, defunding police stations and defunding the police. So I think he's been so busy trying to put out fires to try and get the messaging across that, look, it's all good, everything's under control. But of course, there's just this onslaught of absolute, media against him. And I think as soon as he's able to I know in the midst of everything, it seems a bit impossible, but as soon as he's able to just slow down and get that messaging on point again, I think people will rally behind him. I think because there's so many uncertainties at the moment, trying to get that strong message across at the moment in the midst of everything is a bit tricky. But Biden and Trump, I know that I would solidly place my support behind Trump. Biden is the last person that you would want to see as a US state president. And just, small things. I think Trump just has this ability to connect with people. Again, at the time when he won, he literally defied all the polls, all the popular opinion polls. And of course, we know he can pull this one out of the bag, but that messaging needs to kind of realign again and just get him back on track, because that's what he does the best. So I think he can pull it out. I think people will realise how incompetent Biden actually is.
Senator Roberts, you've got some theories you articulated to me as we were discussing tonight's episode, which I think are relevant to the narrative that's going on in America at the moment. And we actually see this is probably true in all Western democracies, where activists are controlling the debate
Yes.
to a very large extent. And would you do us the favour of just running through those and let's hash those out a little if you've got the time?
Sure. I think I heard my name at the start of this, so I think you're addressing me. There are 7 or 8 steps that I just put together. The first thing the activists do at the moment is they fabricate a problem, whether that's race, whether that's environment, whether that's climate. They then concoct a victim because we all care. That's something. I wear this I can't remember which side this badge is on here, this little feet badge, because not just for the little feet, the babies, but for all humans, because I'm very, very proud of the human race. We've got our deviations, but the humans are wonderful. We humans are wonderful. So what happens is we care. And what the activists do is they prey on that by fabricating a problem, then concocting a victim, and then conjuring an oppressor. And then that could sometimes be capitalism or freedom. Freedom is seen as an oppressor because it's cloaked in other ways. Or human species are seen as an oppressor. And then they pretend a solution that pushes their agenda. And then they disarm people's thinking. They adopt an ideology that is fraught and false, sometimes fraudulent, but they use that to control, and they wrap it all in that, and it sounds nice, whether it's sustainability, which is control, whether it's biodiversity, which is stealing of property rights, whether it's climate, which is about global governance. They come up with these slogans that people feel guilty if they don't support. And then what they do, so they're disarming people's thinking, then they rope in an ally and align potential allied victims, people who will make money out of the scam. So people who invest in intermittent energies like wind and solar. And then they use political correctness to stop debate. And then when they silence debate, and this has happened in so many issues that the control side of politics, the left has done, when they silence debate, everyday Australians, everyday Americans think that they must be in the minority if they disagree. And so that silences it even further. And what they also then do is something you mentioned earlier, Dave. They co-opt the media and the institutions to fabricate a perception of unanimity. And then it's all over. And so what we have to do, I think Maryka said it before we started this broadcast, that we have to stand up as conservatives and say what we think. Because I've stood up a number of journalists, and when we stand up to them, they're not expecting it. And they run. They actually run because they don't have the facts. When we approach them with facts, they run. And that shames them up. So what we have to do, and sadly, both the title parties, we had this deaths in custody. Notice I didn't say black deaths in custody or white deaths in custody. This is from the government's own agency, the Australian Institute of Criminology. Deaths in custody. And its facts are very illuminating. And yet not even the Liberal Party would allow us to discuss that and to move that motion to reveal the facts in here. Their own government. So the Liberal Party is scared of its own shadow. The Labor Party is putting around lies generally about the left side of politics. And so what we've seen is a dismantling and a prevention of debate, and the activists just slide through unchallenged, apart from a few voices.
Yeah. I guess that's the trick. It's such a division to say, you know, there's the left side of politics, there's the right side of politics. I mean, the reality is it exists. So it's such a divisive thing to try and cross those or bridge those gaps. But it's true. I mean, I find it all the time, even though we've got a Christian underpinning, a lot of what we're saying is sort of being able to present people with the facts. And as soon as you start doing that, it really makes people feel uncomfortable to the point now where I even know from a Christian point of view, people don't even want to speak out anymore. They don't want to say anything anymore. It's that lack of conviction. And I think that's what we're perhaps missing as well in political leadership, people are so quick to backflip on particular issues, or they don't want to approach a particular subject because it's too controversial or it's not politically correct enough. And I think we need more leaders of conviction. And it's not about causing division or ruckus or anything like that, but we need to bring some truth back into discussion and allow people to have a healthy debate in this country. That's the only way we can have a healthy democracy, is bringing those sides together, giving people the platforms to debate and share these ideas, having that rich marketplace of ideas. But unfortunately, like Malcolm said, I do feel at times it's incredibly stifled. And I know even for us, anything Christian these days just absolutely arcs people up. So it's a sad reality of, I guess, the political affairs in Australia, because it never used to be like this. You know, common sense would prevail and people would go, well, you're left, you're right, you know what, let's get on with it. But it's just these days, it's just such a almost militant network trying to, one power to submerge the other. And I guess that's a sad state of affairs. We can't have a healthy debate in this country anymore.
That's so refreshing to hear, because I dislike the terms left and right. And you'll notice I said control side of politics,
yes.
and then in brackets, that's the left. Because it's really a debate, not between left and right.
That's right.
But between control and freedom. And that's the eternal, ages-long debate, or
liberty. Yes.
Throughout human history, the ego's desire to control, the control of others. And so it's always control versus freedom. And we can see that now. And unfortunately, the control side is winning in this country because, as you pointed out, Maryka, we can't speak up. Sorry, we speak up, but most people don't.
But we need more.
Yeah, that's right.
I think each of those steps are, absolutely spot on. And I think, I suppose what resonated with me the most is using PC to stop the debate. So even when you do provide the facts, even when you do champion an alternative argument, then comes in the PC to try and say, well, your opinion doesn't count because you're this and this and this and this in terms of your identity. So, incredibly, my own colour has been used against me. You should go back to where you came from, even though I was born in Australia, because you don't understand Australian culture, and we are a progressive society, which I find absolutely incredible, because this is coming from the so-called progressives. So, and that happens consistently. I mean, Maryka, you mentioned, Christian worldview, and when that is put forward, those who do champion, I suppose, issues that are really important to Christians are suddenly demonized for being a Christian, for promoting things like love. Which is, again, overcoming that barrier for people who are standing up on these issues, who are standing up for conservative ideals, takes a lot. No doubt you have all experienced, the hate. I don't go on Twitter too much because of all the trolls. So that's a reality. It's, only
it's exhausting at times.
But be able to go through that. And perhaps that's something that we need to, as conservatives, is actually support one another and help to build our own resilience as a group to continue fighting the good fight. Because what I also do find is, there is I suppose, again, if I can sort of draw an analogy with the church, there is a purist understanding of, what we should do, what we shouldn't do as conservatives, and we end up fighting each other. Perhaps you see a split of parties, minor parties growing up, or, in the church analogy, different denominations coming up because of those strict views that, my way of thinking is correct and yours is not as pure as mine. Whereas if we can find that common ground and stick together, then it would be more powerful, because we are indeed the silent majority. So if we actually used our numbers and actually unified and actually spoke and recognise that we're speaking for the majority out there, it would make a massive difference.
It's true, and I think around key issues, I've had many MPs say to me, "Oh, Maryka, you're labelled with the Christian tag now. You know, there's that's it. You're labelled." And unfortunately, you know, whereas that used to be an asset, you know, if you're a Christian and you're bringing forward ideas of liberty and honesty, and I mean that's the ultimate thing about Christianity, right? It's liberty, it's free choice, it's free will. Like everything stems from that. You know, for people to say, "Oh, Christianity or Christianity is a liability," I guess that's how far the discussion has come in this country. Like if we're as a populace seeing people or Christians as liabilities, you know, being involved in public discussions, that to me is a bit sad, really. But it's true. I often say to people, you know, whether it's that Judeo-Christian mindset really champions liberty in its purest sense, and that's free will. So to me, it's a good thing. I think it's a great thing.
And I think just to build on what you said, and I know you understand this just from the way you just spoke, Maryka, but it's very important to say that I think Christians and Western civilization have been built not just on rampant freedom, but on a sense of responsibility. Because if I'm totally free to do whatever I want, that might impinge upon your freedom. So, and I know you understand that, but it's very important for us to also talk about those things. It comes with a sense of responsibility for ourselves, our own behavior, our choices, and a sense of responsibility towards caring for others and respecting others. So that is what's missing in many, many countries, and the West has got it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, I think one man who does a lot for the cause of Christians in politics is certainly Scott Morrison. He hasn't shied away from his faith, and you know has even allowed media to film him in his church service, and he's soaring in the opinion polls. So I think
fair point.
It perhaps is time that those who have faith, and it's perhaps the driver that makes them want to fight for their community and want to be involved in politics, that I suppose, as you were saying, Maryka, that's not seen as a negative, but it's actually a positive influencer, because, hey, how many people actually would want to be involved in politics if they knew, the real dirtiness and the ugly side? It takes a lot. And I know, one thing that keeps me going certainly is my Christian faith, because, otherwise, what would be the point? It is a grubby, area to be involved in. So, we certainly need more people of integrity who have a value set, whatever, faith background they have or absence of faith, but people of integrity who will, stand side by side to, be in that space, because it's
just conviction.
Space.
Just people who aren't afraid to. Something's right or wrong. At the end of the day, it comes down to that too. Something's either right or it's wrong, and I think, a lot of people have kind of missed out on that a bit. Dave,
it's a rare politician who will vote for something because it's right or wrong. I don't want to make absolute statements that they don't exist, especially present company considered. But I think I know of politicians who I thought shared every one of my ideals, who then went and compromised them to use the most gentle language possible, and they actually, rather than getting angry at them or frustrated or depressed, they actually inspire me. They inspire me to take responsibility and to understand that politics, for the large part, because most politicians are probably putting their careers ahead of their convictions, to understand that there is an economy. There is a real science to the way that politics works, and democracy is not coming from the root word for politician. It's coming from the root word for population, demos. And so it's actually the rule of people. And so if I want my politicians to have convictions, then I basically need to hold their career over their head with stick and carrot combinations and say, if you represent me, then if you work for me, if you represent these non-negotiable issues, then I will reward you with the currency that you're looking for of votes, and volunteerism and donations, and I will do everything it takes to help you get elected, because that's what's most important to you, as opposed to the lives of unborn children. And by the same token, I would like to, with the stick, threaten the career of every politician who would publicly and proudly describe themselves as pro-abortion. And you pick and choose, insert your preferred deal breaker policy here. It might be economics, education, environment, immigration, something else. But you know, as much as we want to have conviction politicians, they're essentially business people, like a shop in a free market, and the supply that they offer will go to the people with the most currency and the most demand. And so let's take responsibility for that ourselves, and bring that currency to the market, and then get the government that we deserve, as we do at every election.
That's right. Yay for democracy.
Yeah.
Yep, well said.
Excellent. Well, let's wrap it up. I do want to, I'm just going to do a little promo for next week's episode, and then we'll run around the panel one last time for final thoughts for the evening. We're at the 90-minute mark now. So next week, we are giving over Pellowe Talk live from the normal 4-person panel that we're doing like we have right now. And we're actually doing an amazing 9-person panel.
Whoa.
Biggest ever. I think the capacity for this platform is actually 10. We can get 6 on screen at once. But what we're doing next week is we're actually doing the official launch of The Good Source. So the website's up and running already. You can have a sneak peek. But next week we're doing the official launch on the 7th of the 7th. And one of those guests, I'll go through the whole list now. One of those guests is going to be one of our guests tonight, Karina Okotel. And we'll get to know a little bit more about her, although she won't get as much airtime, because with 8 other people to have a chat to. The other people that are going to be regular contributors to The Good Source, and who will be joining us to talk about their vision for their show, and get to know a little bit. You won't know all of them, and you will want to. We also have Lyle Shelton, who most of you should know, former managing director of the Australian Christian Lobby. We have James McPherson, a brilliant political mind, former megachurch pastor and prolific writer now, trained journalist from News Limited and Courier Mail, frequently columnist in The Australian, but now most often appearing in magazines like Cauldron Pool, one of my favourite websites, as well as The Spectator. We also have Mark Powell, who will be joining us. George Christensen, MP, will be bringing his podcast, and in the fullness of time, expanding it to include video interviews, so you'll be able to see that. He's got a great podcast. Bernard Gaynor, Bill Muhlenberg, and Maryka Rancy as well. He's got a show in development, and you're going to see all of those shows on The Good Source. But the official launch and meeting all of those contributors to a fuller length will happen next Tuesday night, 7th of the 7th. Don't miss it. It's going to be a huge show. I don't know if we could keep it to just 90 minutes. So come and go, and maybe watch it on replay, but that will be a fantastic night. So a couple of fans in the comments for different people. Just a reminder now on where you can follow me, and where the website is goodsource.news, and that's SAUCE, just like the dead horse tomato sauce. Yeah, that's going to be a whole lot of fun. Well, ladies first, and we'll finish with you, Senator Malcolm Roberts. Maryka, would you like to go first? Your wrap-up thoughts for the evening?
Yeah, I guess thanks so much for pulling this together, Dave. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Good Source does, and just having a really good platform for good conservative people to share their ideas and talk about things that matter. I guess from a political point of view, for us in WA, I just like to keep encouraging people to just be emboldened. If you've got non-negotiables that you are wanting to vote for and that you are absolutely sold on, I'd encourage people to, stick stick to it, be committed in the long run, and of course, get alongside those people who share those values, and just to be encouraged. All of us had to start somewhere. I guess dispelling this PC stuff that's going on does start with opening up the conversation, and it doesn't mean we all have to be involved in politics, just in our sphere of influence or how we interact on Facebook. If you see something or hear something you don't agree with, or you've got an alternative opinion, share it. Be emboldened to share that. So I just like to encourage people more around that, to not be fearful and give into this fearful thing that seems to cripple people, and especially Christians. Just be involved in the conversation and be comfortable and be encouraged by it.
Awesome. Thank you. Good words. And thank you for your contribution tonight, Maryka.
Thanks.
Karina, what are your thoughts for the evening?
Yeah,
wrapping up.
I would say please get involved in politics. If you don't share the Liberal Party's values, then please, don't join the Liberal Party. But if you do share our values, have a look, jump on the website. You can have a look at the
Very
party
well
platform,
said.
the
You don't join the party values. If you don't share the values, don't join the party.
Absolutely not. We don't want, I guess you could say, infiltrators, particularly progressive, trying to get
more Malcolm
involved in the party. Exactly. So, do get involved, because, you can only do so much shouting from the sidelines. Signing petitions are great. Writing letters to your member of parliament, that's great. But if you get involved, as I said before, your voice is amplified. You actually get the ear of your MP. You actually get to decide who your candidate is going to be at an election. You actually get to have your voice and to be able to debate policy in front of not just a party membership, but members of parliament, other people of influence within the political party. It is quite incredible, the power of party membership within the Liberal Party. So I would encourage people to get involved. There's only so long, for me, there was only so long that I could go, signing those petitions, hoping, not receiving any reply to a letter, calling up my MP's office, and then waiting, thinking, now I've made some change happen, and then, seeing nothing happen, to actually being able to sit and even have coffee with your MP, tell them what's on your mind and why, and present them with the evidence, have the time with them, makes, massive amounts of difference. So I would encourage everyone to get involved.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Karina, for coming on the show tonight, and loved your articles. Thank you for that first one of many awesome contributions on The Good Source. And Senator Malcolm Turnbull, thank you for joining us tonight. What are your final thoughts to wrap us up with?
You didn't use my surname. You used another surname.
What did I say?
Turnbull.
If only he thought the way you do. I'm so sorry for getting that wrong.
Yeah, there's not much worse you could have called me. But anyway.
I don't know if there is much worse. Senator Malcolm Roberts, please wrap us up.
First of all, thank you very much for running the show, Dave. I know it takes a lot of work, and so I appreciate that. You bring a platform for people, not just the people who are talking here, but also people who are listening and engaging through their comments. Secondly, to the two ladies, Maryka and Karina, thank you very much for being hospitable guests, fellow guests, and thank you for all three sharing our values in Western civilization and democracy. And Dave, number one, your descriptions of democracy as a marketplace of ideas with a currency of votes, spot on. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, that's our guests. You can find them. Certainly look them up on Facebook and Twitter. And hands up if you're on Parler already.
I'll have to check that out.
Okay. Very good. Get there. Well, don't forget, 7th of the 7th, the launch of Good Source on this channel. Right here where you're watching that. 7th of the 7th, 6 p.m. on the West Coast, 8 p.m. on the East Coast, and 10 p.m. in New Zealand. The current panel is large, but we'll be expanding it to include New Zealand politics. Really keen to cover the New Zealand election this year. Very important that we try and root out the patent socialism in that nation. And hopefully education and truth will be an important part of that. But that's it for Pellowe Talk tonight. Thank you so much to the guests and to all the viewers and watchers who've contributed conversations. We appreciate everything that you've brought to the table, and we'll see you in the comments.